Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Norton of People Plus Purpose, and you have found the Truth Behind Dentistry podcast. And today I am very excited to be joined by Dr. Divian Patel. Dr. Patel is a highly accomplished dentist with a diverse background and extensive experience in both clinical practice and business management. His dental journey began in the UK at the Royal London Hospital in 2010 and then into managing two dental practices in England before relocating to California in 2016. Through entrepreneurial expansion, he has now acquired and is growing 5 dental practices. He mentors dentists in areas such as mindset, business, and clinical dentistry, and he loves to play cricket. Welcome to the podcast, Divian.
Hello, Dr. Norton. How are you?
I'm doing great. Welcome. Glad to have you. Been looking
Thank you.
forward to this conversation. In fact, we had a great conversation that I was thinking, oh, maybe we should have recorded that prior to this recording. So I already am clued in on what a wealth of information you have to share. So I'm going to encourage all of our viewers to lean in a little bit and hear what you have to say. And in great part because you have this unique background of UK education and practice experience. So you know student life there, you know student life here in the US. And I would love to hear you just kind of share with us some of the nuances of things that you've learned and what does that mean for maybe education, but also for practicing doctors.
Yeah, it's a great topic. Obviously, in England, education is a lot more cheaper because it's funded by the government. I actually became a dentist, or I had to enroll into becoming a dentist at 18. So, 18, we really don't know exactly what we want to do. We haven't matured as individuals. It's very tough to make a decision bearing your life at such a young age. And I think as a student at 18, I wasn't the best student. I didn't know how to learn. I didn't know how to really understand and ask the right questions. As a consequence, when I came to the United States, I was a very different type of student. Of course, I had been practicing and I knew a lot more about dentistry,
Mhm.
but my mindset was very different. Having run those two practices and having to look at the cost of education here, I was much more inclined to take full advantage of it. But you're always going to be able to compare and contrast, and I quite quickly saw that due to the cost of education here, and due to debts that are taken out for not just the education but living expenses, acquiring practices, etc. In a 3 or 2 year program, I started to see that a lot of the students aren't equipped to take on the world. Um, I had a very unique outlook into this, especially because I was in a group of international dentists, but also because I had run those practices myself. I
Mhm.
kind of came in knowing what running a practice was. A lot of my international students hadn't run practices.
Mhm.
If you dive deeper into it, you start to look at kind of selection processes of what type of students kind of got into University of Pacific. A lot of those students were 4.0 GPA and above. Most of those students, I'd say, were around 26 or around 24 to 26 years old. So a lot of them had worked very hard academically to get to the point that they were to get those grades. Believe it or not, my GPA was around 2.98, so I would never have become a dentist at
Mhm.
UOP. But more importantly, a lot of them didn't really have life experience. Many of them had never worked a job, and it was difficult for them to transfer academic skills into clinical skills and communication with patients. And I knew very quickly that if that was going to be a stumbling block going forward, all the other obstacles that you face are
Mhm.
going to be very, very difficult.
Mhm.
And that's become the case because I've kept in contact with a lot of my peers at the school, and they're all at different stages. Yes, some have gone on to open practices, some haven't. Some struggle with different areas, and some have excelled. But it's a very interesting dynamic and perspective I have, having done the degree in both England and America.
Yeah, there's so many different as you're sharing that makes me think about how many different skill sets, how many different strengths are being asked of us, but how many different skill sets are required to thrive in business. in a technical field, at a technical science driven field, but that's filled with humans that you are working with and that you are serving. And so, as you mentioned about communication and any number of other what would be called soft skills in that process that have just not been nurtured, emphasized for the sake of the book learning and that technical expertise. So, I mean, so how do you see, if you're in agreement with that, or generally, then how do you see that complicating things? How have you seen that bear out into difficulty in the business setting?
Yeah, great question. I think if you look and see why a lot of students become dentists, and that's both in England and America, is just that 10, 15 years ago, we were told that dentistry is a very safe profession. It's stable, balanced, and lucrative. But I think along the way, we haven't really educated people of the obstacles that they're going to face.
Mm.
Of course, leaving dental school, you need to be a safe beginner, but we also need to educate people on what they're going to face, whether it be a difficult patient, whether it be a lawsuit against them, whether it may be an owner asking to unethical kind of dentistry. And these things happen all the time. And the issue is that a lot of these people, they face them for the first time and have no idea how to handle those things. So in some ways, the schools have become very, very astute at selling the idea of what dentistry used to be, except the cost of it has gone up. And I don't blame them for the cost of everything's gone up. But of course, the student is looking to make a return once they become the professional. So like I said earlier, a lot of these universities have become very, very good at selling professional degrees, not really explaining or having the time to really educate them on the other areas. Thankfully, UOP did have classes on law and ethics in detail. I don't mean just one seminar. We had some practice management things, but they weren't anywhere near enough to navigate your first practice. You know, I'll give you an example. So one of the things that I'm quite passionate about is understanding how to overcome bad reviews or negative publicity.
Mm-hmm.
The school that I went to was very, very good at propping people up. When they did something very well, they celebrated it. You know, we had a day called the Excellence Day.
Mm.
And I walked around and I saw that, wouldn't it be good if there was a 4 or 5 dentists talking about things that didn't go so well for them?
Mm.
A failure day or a failure stand.
Mm-hmm.
All of us are going to go through those things.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is that when you prop a student's not just ego, but their confidence based on success, when that failure comes, it hits them like a ton of bricks.
Yeah, that's good.
And that is going to consistently happen in a practice. You know, my mentor always told me running a practice is like you're a firefighter, you're putting fires out. And so it's no surprise to me that dentistry still ranks amongst the top 3 in the suicide rate.
Yes.
Because not only do you have the debt, you have issues such as being ill-equipped for navigating these problems. You have to deal with so many different types of people. We're in the worst staff shortage in a decade, or in decades rather. And on top of that, you're constantly trying to reinvest in yourself to better yourself. So it's a very big melting pot of difficult obstacles, which are never discussed at dental school, you know. And now, you know, if you look at trends of procedures that dentists are now, or student dentists are doing, those numbers are dropping. So we have got to a point where if we are only doing 10 crown preps before the time you leave school, there really is no time to talk about those other things. Mm-hmm. So these things are becoming more and more swept underneath the carpet. And that all that does is set these students up for failure in the future.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with all of that. And I think that we have to come up with some clearer recommendations, guidance. Maybe we can't fully, in the near term, change the larger system, but there are things that we can do, I believe, to help graduating students moving into practice. Because I think, you know, part of what you're saying is I use emotional agility as one of the assessments that I provide for clients of mine, to be able, because emotions are one of those things that are so powerfully influential within oneself and interpersonally. which relates to resilience in the face of those quote unquote failures that you're talking about, and so many other things that you run into collisions on that you're, under equipped to deal with, at least in the early phases, right? So I think, from your perspective, if here we are and this is the structure, this is the schooling, this is where we are now, what's helpful from your perspective to take the doctors who are listening, new in practice or a little ways in and realizing that some more of the truths that you're talking about, what can we do?
Yeah, very complex, very good question. One thing I would say is that I learned pretty quickly that the American healthcare system, and especially the dental school that I went to, was pretty hostile. And I don't mean perversely hostile. What I mean is that asking questions and trying to better yourself was very much part of a procedure. Well, let me give you an example. Let me back up. If you want to take on something difficult and ask questions about that, the answer would tend to be, or something to the effect of, when you get more experience, you'll be able to handle those things. Rather than saying, this is how you can do these things, it felt like to me that a lot of the professors and teachers were of the nature of, you need to walk those yards to get to that position.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting because we're in the tech field, especially in Silicon Valley, mm-hmm. where youth and new innovations are very much applauded and encouraged. Mm-hmm. But I felt in dentistry, it wasn't so much encouraged. For example, I know that one of my first reviews with my leader, which was in my pod, so essentially we're broken into clinical groups. I remember the very first meeting I had with him saying, a lot of the faculty members are worried that you would be sued because you do your procedure so fast. We have 3 hours to do a filling, okay? Even today, I would do a small filling within half an hour. I think most of your readers, most of your listeners would. But I remember specifically getting that feedback, and I had asked my leader, have you looked into my background? I've been practicing for 5 years. I've run my own practices. It's not that I'm going too fast. This is how I've done dentistry. And to my surprise, he hadn't looked into it. Hmm. So what I'm saying is that I feel like within academic walls, and even in the greater part of dentistry, there is a lot of fear. There's a lot of egos. There's a lot of people being threatened by one another. So it's one of those things where you've got to find the right people. Okay, there are people out there that want to help. And I think that's the responsibility of people like us, so like me, that run practices that have seen the issues and be willing to mentor those people. Because once you mentor those people, you're going to push them way ahead of the rest of the people. What they're doing is they're learning from your mistakes. And eventually, you need to create a win-win situation with those people so that once they assimilate to your methods and you can extrapolate their strengths and weaknesses, mm-hmm. they could be part of your peer group, mm-hmm. right? And that's when we talk about opening up multiple practices with partners. And that's our model. We don't have associates in our model. We have partners that work with us. Mm-hmm. They're either major shareholders or equal shareholders. Mm-hmm. And from that perspective, I think what people need to do is find peers and mentors that can really help them. And I think the American system does have something like that through the AGD and some residency programs. But there's no longevity behind that. Mm-hmm. It takes, you may talk about a difficult case, but it takes 6 to 8 months to do a case. It could take 12 months to do an implant case. If you're there for a year, you're not really going to get that follow through. Right. You need that person you can go back to and say, hey, this is the idea I have. This is the challenges I'm facing. Have you faced something like this? Let's sit down and grab a coffee and try to navigate that. I think that's the part that's missing. So for any of your students or even young doctors, I think finding that person is critical. Because not only do those people have knowledge, there's no real platform for them to really talk about it. Unless they go on things like this, podcasts, etc. Mm-hmm. There really isn't that platform.
Right. Yeah. So kind of more collegial, collaborative support, living less siloed in our own lives and businesses, but to come together for greater solutions and to mentor and help lift each other up and move forward. Then is that
right?
saying.
Right. And it takes some mindset and honesty to be able to say, hey, I have a problem here.
Hmm.
Can you help me? If you look at our profession, everything is painted with a gold brush. Every class you go to, every trade show you go to, every rep is going to try to sell you the next and best, greatest thing that's going to make your life better. But sometimes that's not the solution. Sometimes the solution is going through and sitting down with someone and trying to navigate, for example, how to manage a staff member. Or it could be how to incorporate a bonus system, or how to encourage someone to maybe turn up on time earlier. These are the small things that make a big difference later on in your practicing life.
Hmm.
And if you can't do them at the beginning, they're just going to keep on reoccurring, and that stops productivity.
So I want to take what might appear in our remaining time to be a harder left turn, but I think it's related in that you have expressed the importance of remembering your why. You have also, you were sharing with me about part of how to help thrive at a higher level in the midst of some of these challenges, being connected to that why, or even the responsibility that we have as expert professionals uh, succeeding in business to be kind of causally focused, right? So I would love in the remaining time for you to tell us a little bit about higher purpose as you see that relating, connecting to our businesses, and then also specifically share about what you're passionate about.
Yeah, so I think I was very lucky to live in a very affluent area here in my first 2 or 3 years. I live with my sister-in-law in Pleasanton in the hills. And I remember every single night I would walk through the houses, through the little the courtyards, etc., in the circles. And I remember a lot of people had massive houses, bigger than I could ever dream of.
Mhm.
And everywhere I looked, I used to see one light on. Some people, some people wouldn't take their dogs out. There wouldn't be much commotion. There wouldn't be too much going on. And I very quickly realized the zip code culture that was happening in America.
Mhm.
And that was very different to me because in England, everybody's compressed. You may live in in a middle class family, but you're only maybe one block away from, say, a council slave, which is kind of the projects in England.
Mhm.
But everybody went to school together, essentially, or met on a bus, or played at the same cricket team, or say played at the same park. Everyone was merged together.
Right.
But I noticed very quickly in America that wasn't necessarily the case, especially in the Bay Area. Everything was very structured, you know. And coming back to your question, then the reason why this is important is because I started to look and see, well, what do we need to do better? Like, what do I need to do so I don't end up in that situation? There must be something more to life. It can't be I get to this position, buy a big house, have a nice car, and just end up as these people are. Like, how am I any different? The amount of divorces on that street are up to 60%.
Mm.
How am I going to avoid that?
Mhm.
So I very quickly realized that I need to have a bigger purpose. It needs to be bigger. It needs to be something outside dentistry, and it needs to be sustainable and long term. Something I can really get my teeth into.
Mhm.
So around 3 or 4 years ago, while I was at dental school, I stumbled across a documentary, and the documentary was called "Price of Free." And this documentary was about the reason and the value of things that end up, for example, in the Dollar Tree. We have Dollar Trees in every town, every city in the United States. Why those things are cheap? And a lot of people will say, well, they're cheap because the packaging is smaller or they use different types of materials. Sometimes you get great deals. Nothing comes for free. And the reason why a lot of that stuff is cheap is because the cost of labor to produce it was free.
Mhm.
And so what's happening is that the documentary talks about the leader who actually won the Nobel Peace Prize laureate in 2014. His name's Kailash Satyavthi. He, about 20, 30 years ago, started his venture on saving children in these factories.
Mm.
And he goes from a small organization to now what is a very, very large organization that includes rehabilitation centers, volunteers, attorneys, and ambassadors across the country to create social change. And his whole goal is to educate the world on what's actually happening, as to why you're getting things for free. Why are you getting things not rather for free, but why things are so cheap? Why are Christmas gifts so cheap? Why are these T-shirts when you go to Santa Cruz on the side? Why are these caps cheap? You know, where is this coming from? Where is the middleman? Where is that cost being attributed to?
Right.
So the whole documentary talks about his struggle. He talks about his rise. Up to today, he's rescued 100,000 children from factories.
Wow.
I'd never really been involved in a charity, and I decided, I'm going to go check this out. So I spent a week in one of his rehabilitation centers in Rajasthan. I flew there. It was a very rural part of the country. Of course, it had to be kind of hidden away to protect the identity of the children, and especially traffickers that understand where these kids are going. And to my surprise, I saw a lot of the kids on the documentary at the rehabilitation center. So the purpose of the documentary is to talk about and educate you on why what's happening, how difficult it is to stop, and how they go about stopping them. But what I did see is what the video didn't necessarily show was that when I got to the rehabilitation center, I saw the rehabilitated kids. I saw how resilient these kids are, how they wouldn't be any different to kids at a normal school. So they themselves go for a process of where they're captured in factories, saved from captivity, rehabilitated through PTSD and through counseling, etc. And then they're integrated into either a school or a vocation. And so I saw this and I thought, I can't let this stand and happen. So now what I do is I donate lots of my money and time to building the brand awareness for his charity, and also on projects that I have, with him on the side. So it's really uplifting to me because I want to make a difference, and this type of difference is huge. Children are very, very sacred human beings. They're very innocent, and for far too long, there's too many powers that be that keep their voice closed. There was a movie that just came out in Hollywood called The Sound of Freedom. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. Hollywood tried to block that.
Yes.
And it's terrifying because there's a lot of players behind the scene that don't want this to come to light. And I just can't stand for that. My hero is Batman. I'm a big fan of Batman, and being one of those leaders without a title, he embeds a lot of what I'm trying to do here. And Kailash is a real Batman. He's really out there. He's saving kids, and I went and I saw it all firsthand. It wasn't just an advert that I looked at. It was very much in depth. And at this point now, I'm kind of embedded in their charity. I've kind of built a couple of schools where Tesla panels are used for the solar energy. There's a bookcase. There are plenty of kind of areas where kids can kind of educate themselves. There's a toilet as well. So what you'll find in India is that there are several nomadic communities, especially girls are still being sold in child bridal marriages. So we educate communities on why that's wrong. So we're specifically, those two are educating a lot of girls ranging from ages 4 to 6, even up to 12 in some situations. So I'm at the beginning part of that journey. I hope eventually to be able to transition into this full time and really make a difference. This is not a small organization. I think one big part about this is bringing social change.
Yes.
And a lot of this is educating people on what's happening, and just like Sound of Freedom, it educates people.
Right.
This is the same thing, that documentary educated me, and I thought I need to really look into this. And I think a lot of people watch it and they understand this is a big issue. But the harder part is that what can you do to change this?
Right.
And I think the documentary does a very, very nice job of explaining to you what you can do with your day-to-day actions, looking and seeing where things are from. Anything from clothes, makeup, toys, all sorts of things. There are pathways to find sustainable and ethical, shops. A lot of them are now making that a priority of theirs. A lot of these companies now are social causes themselves and pride themselves on where their goods are manufactured. I think that is a big plus, and it makes it easier for you to kind of make your decisions. So yeah, when I go through the trials and tribulations of being a dentist, I know in the back of my head that I'm doing this primarily to help these children. They cannot go any longer with no voice.
Yes.
And now that I have an outlet and a structured charity and a sustainable charity, I know that there is a plan and there's an action. It's not just money being dumped into an escrow. There is always a way to use that money. And it's not just money here. It could be just getting this documentary in front of a group of people and educating them. A lot of people just don't know about them.
Right.
They just don't know about this. They don't know this stuff is happening.
Right.
When you look at the sex industry for children, it's extremely lucrative because a child can be used over and over again. It's not a drug. It's not a piece of clothing that's sold once.
Yeah.
And that's why this industry is so highly protected by the black market, because of how lucrative it is. And children don't speak. It's very similar to when you have your dog or your cat go back in the vets. You don't know what happens. It's horrifying, but it's amazing to understand and know that there are people and his organization out there that can really make a difference. And I'd love it if you would be able to kind of share his documentary perhaps at the bottom. That would be great.
Yes.
And I think that is bigger than even the donations of money, just showing people what's happening, because the pretense of what the documentary goes into, it's not, for example, a kid being kidnapped on the side of the road. That's not how this happens. The way that mass number of children are filtered into child labor is that traffickers go to very vulnerable parents. They have 5 or 6 kids that may be in a rural area saying, hey, I know kids aren't really being educated here. Why don't I take your 10-year-old? I'll take him to Delhi, which is a big city, or Mumbai. We'll give them some food. We'll give them some work, and here's an upfront cost. Here's your payment. They take ID cards away from the parents, and they never see the children again. So essentially, the parents are being tricked into giving their kids away.
Yes.
They have no idea. So this is not one of those things where, like I said, it's a child being kidnapped on a motorcycle. This is a very sophisticated way in which they are deceiving parents. And of course, it happens up and down the country.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is it's a hard topic. And I'm sure there's people listening going, whoa, didn't necessarily expect that, but I'm glad that we've had this conversation. And I appreciate you for not only for clarifying a bigger why and how that is all relative, the daily challenges as a dentist, right, compared to some of what goes on in the world. But beyond that, your commitment to do something, to learn more and to do something about it. So I know you're not doing it for appreciation, I can tell, but I do appreciate you and applaud the effort you're putting into it, the voice that you're contributing, and for inviting other people to follow along, and whether it's this particular cause or something else that maybe more compelling specifically for them. But I think in principle, this is really important. So I would love to have another conversation with you because I feel like there's so much more to talk about. But for those people that are watching who either because they were intrigued by the first part of our conversation and would like to engage with you and learn more and gain some of your wisdom and perspective, some strategies, whatever you might be able to help them with, or because they would like to find out more about how they can be a part of this particular cause that you're passionate about, what's the best way to reach you?
They can they can email me at divianpatel@gmail.com, or even they can call me on my number. I can perhaps give that to you after, and then they can reach out to your podcast and they can text me once they've been screened. But yeah, I'd love to have more people involved. I was mentioning to you, before that, one of the superhuman strengths of humans is that we socialize and assimilate together for a single cause. That's one of the reasons how we dominate the world. I think we're getting away from that as we look at what social media is doing, what insecurities are occurring with people. If we look at the prevalence of anxiety and depression on the increase, things like this bring people together. And it's a very, very important cause, and I'm hoping that by the time I go, there will be a huge change in the way it's perceived. The new generation is very different, and I'm very hopeful that that we can eradicate such a heinous act that's happening to the children across the world. You know, the stats are horrifying. You know, 1 in 10 children are in child labor right now. You know, could you just imagine in your classroom going up 1 in 10 of your children are not going to school? They're going to maybe make some bricks, or they're going to a pottery, factory. It's horrifying because it's just unfair, you know.
Yeah.
And to know that we are part of the cause of that, especially America,
Yeah.
we're the only country in the entire world that hasn't got legislation to mandate where our clothes come from. So if you look at the back of your clothes, sometimes it's blank. We're the only country that does that. Every other country is mandated to report that. And of course, we do that to save costs,
Right. Right.
because we're in such a market where we have to drive the dollar, spend, save,
Yeah.
spend and save,
Yeah.
and you know that's it's quite telling. But like I said, you know, there are a lot of social outfits out there that are making a conscious effort to tell you where their goods have come from and how they've been crafted.
Well, I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This has been enjoyable and fascinating, and I think that, and I appreciate the message that you've brought to our viewers, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really appreciate, you know, giving me the platform to talk about this. It's very difficult to kind of go out there and talk about this. I send the documentaries to people, and maybe for every 50 people I send it to, I can maybe get 2 or 3 that actually watch it. I recently came across one person that watched it, was engrossed in it and wanted to make a change. And it dawned on me that once that person watched it and really understood it, that they got it, they were engaged,
Right.
and they wanted to make a change. I wish I could change those statistics. You
Yeah.
know, instead of 1 in 50, maybe 1 in 10.
Right.
Then we can make a real big change. It's just getting people down to watch and educate themselves on what's actually happening, because honestly, the wool is being pulled over their eyes.
Yeah.
We just don't. They just don't know it, and I didn't know it before I watched the
Right.
documentary.
Right. Yeah. So hopefully conversations like this can help
All right.
bridge and move and help bring more of the culture of people who can do something about it to be ready to take some
Yeah.
action. So
And you can do something about it. Like dentists, especially most of your viewers of dentists, we're in the top 1% of this country, but I don't think we're doing 99% of the work.
yeah.
We're just not. When we can make a stand, and I don't know if we could get one of the big organizations to push behind something like this. I'm not sure, but that would be a goal for me to kind of align one of the big organizations with such a charitable cause. I'm working with some of your colleagues like Darius and Trey to help that.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be good to kind of also at the same time make social change so
Yes.
people understand. So that's kind of my part-time job. And some people look at me crazy when they say, "Why would you do that?" It's just that's quite indicative of our times.
Yes.
That it's kind of sad, but what can you do? You have to plow on. They have a need. You have to fill that need, and that's why I try to raise money for them. I myself donate and build some of the schools for the kids. But making other people aware is really important.
Yeah.
One of the things I did recently is that, and I was very happy with my group, that we had a group donation, or not donation, rather, we had a group investment in a startup company. And as the carry, I kind of charged everyone 5% towards my charity. So if this company goes up, 5% of the winnings will go towards the charity. So creating kind of win-win situations like that is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of what I'm doing on the sidelines. Yeah.
That's great. Well, I appreciate your passion for all this. So for everybody watching, this is Matthew Norton, and I've been with Dr. Divian Patel. And I hope that you have been not just enjoyed this episode, but been moved by this episode and will want to do something more. So would love for you to feel inspired to reach out to Dr. Patel to learn more. So thank you for staying with us and for listening through, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thank you.
Bye.